Dexter has faced so many enemies that barely make a ripple before becoming fish food. They talk big, but fold fast, usually before the episode ends. So let's take a deep dive into why these villains look dangerous on the surface, but never stand a chance against Dexter. When you look at who these killers actually target, it becomes obvious why none of them belong in the same conversation as Dexter Morgan. Some of these lesser villains might seem terrifying to an ordinary person, but most of us aren't trained killers or living in constant fear of running into one. Catching a normal, defenseless person with their guard down isn't exactly a challenge, especially if that person is small, vulnerable, or a child. Think about the usual victims of these low-tier killers. Young women, defenseless children, immigrants in desperate situations, people who have no real way to fight back. Luring a kid, snatching a drunk woman outside a bar, pushing someone unstable towards suicide, or shoving people off a boat with a gun. It's horrific. It's also not talent. It's cowardice, disguised as skill. These are just a few examples of what some of the weaker adversaries of Dexter were up to before he stopped them, but they illustrate the types of targets almost all of them go for throughout the series. That isn't impressive, it's pathetic and detestable. The killers aren't special, and they aren't showing any particularly impressive abilities when they assault a kid or knock out an average-sized adult before killing them. Serial killer or otherwise, unimpressive people commit murder every day. They also get caught all the time because they aren't smart. They aren't cunning, they aren't uniquely threatening at all. They're usually just people with anger problems, impulse control, and a baffingly high level of confidence in their ability to get away with it. When the person they are up against is a normal person who tends to go through the world without an inexplicable fear of running into a sadistic maniac, the task these villains set themselves up for becomes all the easier. But going up against Dexter, that isn't going to be as simple. Dexter has almost a sixth sense that allows him to spot a fellow predator with no effort. What he calls his lizard brain could have stemmed from the trauma he faced as a child, but how honed it becomes in his adulthood is the result of unparalleled training. He spent his entire life on guard, and his father taught him even more ways to sniff out a criminal. The vetting process is still necessary, of course, before a kill, but that initial instinct of where to go, what to bring with him, who to avoid, who to manipulate, and who to pay closer attention to is innate. A good example is in season 2 when he's trying to locate Freebo, and he shows up to a house with a bag of Oreos, licking just the cream. That is total heroin addict behavior if I've ever seen it. Grade A acting by Michael C. Hall. All that sneaking around and tricks he uses to get closer to people, to get them to let their guard down, is what Dexter is best at. Most of the gimmicks his victims use don't knock Dexter off his game on their best day. You can count on one hand how many times a villain has gotten Dexter trapped, tied up, or otherwise incapacitated. And even when they manage to get past that part of their plan, he always gets out of the trap and kills them shortly after. And again, he's rarely ever caught at all. Every time I witness one of these characters gearing up to try and get the better of Dexter, all I can do is shake my head. We all know what's coming next. The arrogance to compare catching Dexter to catching some random woman off the street is laughable. Yet somehow the only person who seems to have realized this was Al Jolly Walker, who was so scared of Dexter that he fled New York and probably had no plan to return unless and until Leon Prater took care of him. For some reason, everyone else in the series completely convinced themselves that they could handle him. Meanwhile, they couldn't even get him on the ropes for a second. In their defense, Dexter is a highly trained killing machine whose first rule in life is don't get caught. But the fact of the matter is that anyone with a functioning brain would realize that they weren't dealing with an average target after interacting with Dexter for even a minute. He looks, speaks, and moves like a highly calculating man, while their normal victims had none of those same qualities. Why someone would size Dexter Morgan up as equal to one of their standard targets is beyond comprehension. And this only takes into account the villains who actually get the opportunity to fight back. Most of them don't even see Dexter coming. One minute they are walking around, probably planning their next attack, and the next thing they know, they wake up wrapped in plastic with a scalpel to their cheek. But whether they are keen enough to see Dexter coming, at which point it's already too late by the way, or they have no idea they are being stalked and vetted at all, the end results are always the same: a watery grave or a furnace as their final resting place. And what's more pathetic is that some of these villains consider themselves to have specific areas of expertise. They have very specific MOs that they have taken the time to perfect, and they think that that will be enough to overpower anyone who challenges them. But what they fail to realize is that Dexter is an expert in many areas and styles of killing, not just one. Dexter isn't a one-trick pony. He is not reliant on one singular angle or ability to hit his mark. He can take them with his hands literally tied behind his back. Take George King, the Skinner, for instance. King was ex-military from Nicaragua, and this gave him skills like stalking people without being easily detected and using advanced torture methods to get the information he wanted out of his targets. Those aren't bad skills for a ruthless criminal to have, but they aren't unique or even particularly difficult to learn if you really are just a crazy person who wants an excuse to kill people. But he failed to consider that there might have been a person out there who was immune to his short-sighted methods. Dexter isn't scared of being interrogated. He isn't a stranger to pain, and he isn't going to give up information that could harm him just because someone holds a carving knife to his skin. Dexter has been grilled in interrogations without breaking a sweat or missing a beat. He has been strangled, beaten, even shot, and still he gets away every time. So when your big move is, tell me what I want to know or I'll cause you pain, it's not going to get you very far when Dexter is on the receiving end. Dexter willingly crushed his own hand to get out of the restraints the Skinner had him in. Does that seem like something a person who is afraid of pain would ever do? And worse still for the Skinner is the fact that Dexter has all of those skills himself. He's better at wielding them, and he has several other skills that George King could never even dream of mastering. And that goes for most of the killers Dexter takes care of. They all have one or two skills, maybe three, but Dexter has so many that it is hard to keep track of them all. So even if they seem scary to a child like Wendell Owens or a spineless drug dealer like Freebo, these villains look virtually harmless when they confront Dexter. And as if his superior abilities weren't already on full display, Dexter reminded all of us how untouchable he really is when he killed the Skinner with a freshly broken hand. Absolutely no tools, and the police closing in while still managing to escape the scene without being noticed. It was probably one of the most embarrassing defeats for any multi-episode villain in the whole series. We also have to consider that Dexter's method is just too clean. He doesn't go around beating random people in the night or stealing children from public places littered with security cameras. And he doesn't typically attack anyone who will be missed or sought after. Keep in mind that his victims are almost always heinous criminals that most people wanted to go away anyway. So when they disappear, the search for Dexter's victims are short-lived, and that's assuming they happen at all. Dexter is skilled in evading capture, but before it even gets to that point, Dexter's style of subduing his victims makes the entire process as simple as possible. Dexter doesn't run around with a gun, forcing people into cars or anything reckless like that. He follows his targets until he learns their routine inside and out. He recognizes the moments when they will be at their most vulnerable and have the least surveillance around them, and then he injects them with a tranquilizer before they even know what's happening. They're knocked out without much noise, without any sign of struggle, and without any indication of foul play ever entering the picture. It's like they just disappeared. And an unconscious person can't fight back or scream for help. They're completely at his mercy, like an insect caught in a spider's web the moment the M99 hits their bloodstream. Of course, no one looks particularly strong after getting a needle to the neck and collapsing to the floor, but these people are already unimpressive. Still, Dexter makes these people look weaker by simply being who he is and using the basic skills he was taught from a young age to put an end to their madness. Dexter knows how to hunt. He knows how to subdue. He knows how to kill efficiently, and he can do it all without leaving a trace. He is highly manipulative and regularly tricks even the most intelligent people into believing him. For years, he tricked his sister Deb, Maria LaGuerta, Angel Batista, and even Special Agent Frank Lundy of the FBI into thinking he was just a normal guy. Dexter has no problem avoiding detection in most cases, and even when they arise, he manipulates the situation so that he can remain free. He's able to manufacture basically perfect scenarios that keep him overlooked and safe. No matter how hard people try to pin him down, it never pans out for them. So when necessary, he even uses extreme measures outside of the code that less seasoned predators would never even consider, let alone pull off. When you consider the lengths that Dexter is willing to go to for himself and his family, it makes even the most dedicated killers look like unskilled idiots. Miguel Prado, for example, was willing to risk his entire career, his freedom, and even his life to avenge the death of his baby brother Oscar. After Oscar was killed by Dexter, Dexter made it appear as if a local drug dealer, Freebo, was the man responsible for the death. Miguel became obsessed with finding Freebo, and when Miami Metro's homicide department was working too slowly for his liking, he decided to find Freebo himself and make him pay for killing his brother. Of course, Freebo did not kill Oscar. Dexter did that. But he was able to frame everything in the investigation to make Freebo look like the only suspect, kill him at his leisure, and convince the ADA of Miami to keep it quiet. When Miguel finally did work up the nerve to kill Freebo, he showed up to the location drunk and stumbling, drenched in rain with a gun and nothing even resembling an exit plan. He was definitely dedicated to avenging his brother's death, and he was willing to go to extremes to make that happen. But Dexter already handled it, and he had a far more sophisticated method in place to ensure that nothing was traced back to him. And Miguel was the big bad of the season. He was the scary figure that was supposed to challenge Dexter by taking him to the cleaners, and he couldn't even manage to successfully take out smaller targets like Freebo or his own nemesis Ellen Wolf with anything close to Dexter's proficiency. Where does that leave a novice like Miguel when he inevitably squares off with Dexter? Of course he seemed weak, because he was. Besides not having a single clue what he was doing or how to get away with it, Miguel Prado was misguided by heightened emotions and his own arrogance. Dexter has been overcome with emotion on occasion, but he usually manages to keep a level head, which allows him to operate with clarity and precision that these villains lack. He may be damaged, but Dexter is still very human, which means that he can be overcome with emotions if they are intense enough, but those instances are so few and far between that he's almost never at the mercy of his feelings, no matter how strong they are. Other killers like Lila West, Miguel, the Brain Surgeon, the Doomsday Killer, and his followers are all lost in their determination to meet whatever arbitrary goal they have in mind at the time. So much so that they leave themselves completely vulnerable in one way or another, and that allows more than enough time for Dexter to outmaneuver them. Lila blew a man up because she wanted to be in a relationship with Dexter. Jordan Chase built himself up to a status that most people only dream of, and then used that power for the ridiculous mission of getting back at the women he thought wouldn't have dated him when he was just a chubby teen. Miguel drove around using his own car, looking to shoot a wanted drug dealer for allegedly killing his brother without even knowing all of the facts. The Brain Surgeon got away with killing his own brother, and later a bunch of his peers in a fire. He adopted a new identity that was working seamlessly, only to throw all of that ill-gotten luck away to torment his negligent mother before dying by an ink pen to the jugular. He walked into a hospital with a gun planning to kill a cop he was already wanted for gravely wounding, and thought what? He'd just shoot Deb in her hospital bed and slip back out and drive to freedom. Dexter didn't even have to stop this ridiculous plan. On his way to Deb's room, Oliver Saxon was caught by Batista. And the plans and methods of other killers like Ray Speltzer, Matt Chambers, and Lowell Sloan were even more embarrassing. These people are hilariously stupid, and they cannot curb their own impulses long enough to actually get away from police for long, let alone Dexter. Because, make no mistake, many of these killers were already on police radar. Lundy was even on the cusp of catching Arthur Mitchell, the elusive Trinity killer, before his untimely death. The police were accurately tracking the members of the Barrel Girls gang when Dexter and Lumen were just a bit ahead of them. The cops were also on the trail of the ice truck killer, even figuring out his real name and tracking him down to his own property where he was holding Deb hostage. Dexter just barely outpaced them in that case. Maria was just about to pin Miguel for the murder of Ellen Wolf, but Dexter killed him before he could talk to police. The list goes on and on. These people weren't even strong enough or smart enough to evade police scrutiny, yet somehow they positioned themselves to go against Dexter and thought they lived to tell the tale. Even compared to the standout big bads like Isaac Serco, Kurt Caldwell, and Leon Prater, most of the villains Dexter eliminated look like confused novices. Isaac Serco knew enough to get Dexter on his side before he could kill him. Kurt got away with decades of kills and only faltered in his final days by targeting Harrison, which we all know is more than enough for Dexter to start prepping a kill room. And Leon Prater was smart enough to blanket himself with well-paid and trained security at all times to avoid being killed for as long as possible. And despite all of this, these villains still died. With that in mind, what chance does a Steve Dorsey or a Boyd Fowler really have? These killers don't just seem weak for no reason. The truth is that they are weak, and under no circumstance can they hold a candle to Dexter. He's just better at their game than they are. The takeaway? When it comes to people like Clint McKay, AJ Yates, George King, Jorge Castillo, and all of the other villains in their hilariously unimpressive rank, the reason they seem weak is because they are weak. Having a near-perfect killer like Dexter in their midst only highlights that fact. The thing about these villains that exposes how pathetic they really are is the glaring reality that they are not Dexter Morgan. They lack patience, they act on emotion and passion, they overestimate their abilities, and they behave so recklessly as a result that even when they are on the brink of finding themselves saran-wrapped to a kill table, they can't see how outmatched they really are. Dexter is just built different. These lesser villains make the mistake of believing that because they are able to prowl the streets and hurt untrained innocents who have no preparation, that this somehow makes them prepared to get the best of Dexter Morgan, the Bay Harbor Butcher, a man who, for the most part, had almost nothing to lose and used the little that he did have to lose as more motivation to eliminate them. Their failure is that they don't understand there is nothing comparable about Dexter when it comes to their regular victims. He's stronger, more adept, and more efficient than anyone they have ever hoped to take out. Their most fatal flaw is that they don't recognize that Dexter is the apex predator, and against him, their juvenile tactics will always look inferior. Do you think these villains had a chance, or are they all as weak as they look? Drop a comment below with your thoughts. And if you liked this video, check out the glimpse into the final 24 hours of every Dexter villain to see just how out of their depth they really were. And remember, don't be a victim, slash that subscribe button for more compelling breakdowns. And as always, thanks for watching.